January 2024, Las Vegas. A founder in his early 30s walks on stage holding a bright orange square about the size of a stack of Post-its, and within 20 minutes, half the tech press in the room thinks they just watched the smartphone get replaced. The device is called the R1, the company is Rabbit, and the pitch, delivered by founder Jesse Liu, is simple: stop opening apps. Press a button, say what you want, and a system called a large action model, and Rabbit's own term, competing directly with the large language model everyone already knew, logs into Uber, DoorDash, or Spotify on your behalf, and just does it. Pre-orders sell out within minutes, multiple times. Reviewers at the show call it one of the most interesting product ideas of the year. For about 10 weeks, Rabbit is the most talked about hardware startup in tech. Then, the units actually ship. Rabbit R1 launched to customers in late April 2024, and the reaction was immediate and brutal. Reviewers, who'd been excited 3 months earlier, were now describing a device that barely worked. One widely read review called it a buggy, unfinished product that failed at almost everything it promised. A single-star verdict from a publication that doesn't hand those out lightly. The core problem wasn't just bugs. It was that a teardown of the device revealed something embarrassing. Functionally, the R1 was an Android app, wearing a $199 piece of custom hardware. Almost everything the device did could technically run on a phone you already owned. The dedicated hardware, the scroll wheel, the camera, the physical button, wasn't doing much that the software layer couldn't have done in an app. And the large action model, the entire reason the device existed, it barely functioned. Early testers found it could sometimes order a pizza. It struggled with almost everything else. That would have been survivable on its own. Hardware startups ship rough version 1s all the time. What made 2024 genuinely disastrous for Rabbit was that the software problems were only the first domino. In May 2024, a community of reverse engineers, calling themselves Rabbitude, got into Rabbit's codebase and found something far more serious than bad UX, hard-coded API keys, sitting directly in the source code. Not encrypted, not rotated per device, the same keys, baked into every single unit. In practical terms, that meant someone with access to those keys could read every response the R1 had ever given any user, including anything personal. They could alter what the device said. They could even brick every R1 in existence, remotely. Rabbit didn't say much for weeks. When the researchers went public in late June, the company scrambled to rotate the keys and in the process caused an actual outage of its own text-to-speech service. Then, days later, the same researchers found a fifth key the company hadn't caught, this one tied to the email system, running the device's spreadsheet features. It was still live when they published the follow-up. So, within 2 months of launch, Rabbit had gone from CES darling to a company that shipped an unfinished product, built it on hardware that arguably didn't need to exist, and left a master key sitting in the open that could compromise every customer's device at once. And then came the part that had nothing to do with the product at all. Weeks after launch, YouTube investigator Coffeezilla published a video digging into Jesse Liu's history before Rabbit. Turns out, Rabbit Inc. used to be called Cyber Manufacture Co., and its previous project was an NFT-based metaverse game called Gamma, the kind of 2021-era crypto venture that raised several $1 million, promised a game built in Unreal Engine, and quietly faded out as the market turned. Liu had publicly claimed he'd never touch crypto and downplayed his role in it. The receipts said otherwise, AMAs, where he discussed a planned Gamma token and old promotional material scrubbed from the internet after people started asking questions. None of that meant the R1 itself was a scam, but combined with everything else, it gave critics a clean, damning narrative, a founder with a pattern of overpromising attached to a device that overpromised that also happened to leak your data. By mid-2024, Rabbit R1 wasn't a product anymore. It was shorthand for the entire AI gadget bubble at its worst. Here's the part most people missed, because by then, nobody was really watching anymore. Rabbit didn't shut down. Liu posted a video acknowledging the team had been overwhelmed by the hype and the expectations it created, and the company kept shipping. Through the back half of 2024 and into 2025, updates kept landing, a more capable search mode, a teach mode that let users manually demonstrate a task once so the device could repeat it, a web-based playground for testing agent behavior. None of it was the smartphone killer from the keynote. Most of it was reviewed as experimental, at best, prone to getting stuck in loops, or defeated by a CAPTCHA. But it was progress, quietly, on a product everyone had already written off. By September 2025, Rabbit had pushed an entire operating system overhaul, a touch-first interface, gesture navigation, a feature letting users build small tools directly on the device. Nobody covered it, the way they'd covered the launch. There was no headline left to write. The company had spent that year rebuilding trust with the few thousand people who still owned the hardware, not the internet at large. Then, in January 2026, two things happened that actually mattered. First, Rabbit announced new funding and shipped a feature called DLAM. Plug the R1 into your Windows or Mac computer over USB, and it becomes a plug-and-play controller for your desktop, no setup required. Second, and more interesting, Rabbit integrated OpenClaw. If you haven't heard of OpenClaw, it's worth a quick detour because it's currently one of the fastest-growing pieces of software on the internet. It's an open-source, self-hosted AI agent that connects a model to your files, your inbox, your calendar, your messaging apps, and actually executes tasks instead of just answering questions. It went from a weekend project to tens of thousands of GitHub stars in days, and it works entirely through chat apps like WhatsApp and Telegram. The one thing it never had was a dedicated piece of hardware you could just talk to. Rabbit had exactly that hardware, sitting mostly unused, in drawers. So, they wired it in. Point an R1 at your own OpenClaw setup, and suddenly, the device that once failed to reliably order a pizza is issuing voice commands to one of the most capable autonomous agents currently available, checking your inbox, summarizing documents, running scripts, browsing on your behalf. By July 2026, Rabbit had gone further, adding support for Anthropic's Claude code directly on the device, and a proactive mode that surfaces reminders and journal entries without being asked. The R1 never became the standalone AI brain Jessie Liu promised on stage in 2024. What it became, almost by accident, is a voice-controlled remote for whatever agent ecosystem turns out to win. It stopped trying to be the smartest thing in the room and started being the interface for whatever is. That's a very different outcome from what happened to its closest launch-year rival. Humane's AI Pin, announced around the same time, with a similarly ambitious pitch, was discontinued outright in February 2025. The hardware stopped working, the company's assets got sold off, and that was the end of it. Rabbit, despite arguably worse press in 2024, is still shipping firmware updates as of this year. The lesson isn't that Rabbit was secretly good all along. The reviews were fair, the security failure was real, the founder's past was worth scrutinizing. But the company survived the worst possible launch in recent hardware memory by doing something unglamorous. It kept a small, orange, largely mock device alive long enough for someone else to build the actual technology it had promised, and then plug straight into it. Rabbit spent 2024 telling everyone it had already built the future of how humans talk to machines. It turns out, it just needed to survive long enough to become the button you press to reach it.